for this special program of our Indian Institute of World Culture. The topic of this evening's talk is also special, and the speaker is also special. The topic, as you all know, is brain and mysticism, and the speaker is Dr. Gopikrishna Deshpande, who is an associate professor of Auburn University. Dr. Deshpande has very many achievements to his credit. His biodata runs 2 pages, and I will be presenting before you a very brief biodata about him, because we are all more eager to know about what he's going to speak. Gopikrishna Deshpande is an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering and heads neuroimaging activities at the AU MRI Research Center in Auburn University, USA. Dr. Gopikrishna is also an affiliated faculty at the Department of Psychology at Auburn University. Before moving to Auburn, Dr. Gopikrishna was a postdoctoral fellow at the Biomedical Imaging Technology Center, Emory University, 2007 to 2010, USA. Dr. Gopikrishna received his PhD degree in biomedical engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology, USA, from 2003 to 2007, and MS degree in electrical communication engineering from Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, India, 2001-2003. His major accomplishments may be briefly touched upon this. Dr. Gopikrishna has published more than 60 peer-reviewed articles in the fields of signal processing, machine learning, neuroimaging, and more specifically, functional magnetic resonance imaging and brain connectivity. He is a co-recipient of the President's Outstanding Collaborative Units Award. He has received more than $4 million in research funding from DARPA, DARPA, and NIH of USA. He has been invited to deliver more than 21 invited lectures in 6 continents of the world. His research on autism, religion, and dogs has featured in various national and international media, including a cover story in the New York Times, and he has collaborated with individuals in 18 different countries. Specifically, he has collaborated with meditation expert Dr. Sarah Lazar at Harvard University. Dear friends, this topic has its own grandeur. There is a nice quotation I have collected for you. This is a statement by Thomas Alva Edison, who says, "The chief function of the body is to carry the brain around." So, the brain forms the most central organ in the human system. And there is one more quote from Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle, who says, "I am a brain, Watson. The rest of me is a mere appendix." You can know the importance of the brain in every domain of human activity. We speak of hardware and software. The brain is referred to by scientists as a half-pound ware. It is through the brain that we understand the complexities of the world outside. And it is this brain, in relation to one's own self, the depths of one's own self, that we have to understand the brain itself. The Brihadaranya Upanishad asks one question: Vijñātāram are kena vijaniyāt? How is one to comprehend the comprehensor? Here, the brain itself is the subject and the object of the study. And mysticism, obviously, is a very difficult subject. The chief difficulty being getting proper subjects, because there are many who may claim very extraordinary things, but the truth is given away by advanced technological pieces such as fMRI. Let me not take much of your time. We all look forward to the brilliant speech by Dr. Gopikrishna Deshpande.
Thank you very much for the cordial introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about the brain and mysticism. And before I get to the outline of the talk, I just want to introduce a little bit about this topic itself. So let's look at the information landscape about this topic. There are three types of information available regarding brain and mysticism. There's a large amount of so if you just go ahead and do an internet search on Google, you'll find a large amount of information. And I'm sure all of you have, if you're on Facebook or WhatsApp or Twitter, you receive a large amount of information on this topic. Many of them are demonstrably false. When I say demonstrably false, it's not as if there is no evidence for or against it. It can be shown that it is not true. So I'm really not going to touch that kind of information at all. The second type of information is basically speculation based on some sort of indirect evidence. But there are different types of models that can be built. And the speculation, there is some basis to it. Some of it might be true and some of it might be false. I'm also not going to touch that type of information. The third type of information is relatively small. When I say relatively small, it's about 700 peer-reviewed journal papers. The peer-reviewed journal papers, what it means is that some scientists have done experiments. There is some experimental evidence for what they're claiming. Other scientists have looked at it and they have approved that what they have done is correct. And there are other scientists who have tried to replicate it, reproduce it, and it has been replicated and reproduced, and they have gotten similar results. So this is what I call as hard science, and because there is solid experimental evidence for it. So I'm really not discounting the value of having speculative information or modeling. That is fine, but it's just that I don't have time to go into that. So the only stuff that I'm going to be talking about is the one in the bottom, which is looking for the cursor. So this is what I'm going to be talking about, the hard science. And the reason I'm going to be talking about that is because it's demonstrably true. If you have the time and patience, you can go and do the same experiment and get the same result. So whatever statements or claims I'll be making, I'll give references for it. You can go and check that if you're interested further in that topic. Okay, so this is the information landscape. I just wanted to put this out in the beginning and make sure that you know what I'm going to cover. Okay, and if there are any criticisms, any comments on what I'm talking about, you're most welcome to hear them at the end of the talk. Okay, so there has been intense interest in this topic. Here I'm going to show so what this shows is basically, this is a graph from this paper, the Journal of Religion and Health, which was published in 2016. It shows the number of articles that have been published in this area from 1979 to 2013. And you can see that there has been an explosion in the number of articles published after 2000. And 1990 to 2000 was actually declared as the decade of the brain, wherein there was large-scale effort from the governments to actually push brain research. So there has been intense interest in this topic in the scientific community. This also shows where most of the research, almost half of the research, happened in North America. And thirdly, what I want to say is there has always been skepticism in the scientific community regarding this topic. is it really something that's worth pursuing through scientific methods? That skepticism is kind of going away. And as you can see here, Dalai Lama gave actually a lecture in the annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience in Washington DC this year. And even though some people did not like it, it shows that science is open to investigating these kinds of questions. Okay, so given this information landscape, let me come back to the outline of the talk. So basically there are going to be two different modules. First module, I'm going to give kind of a basic introduction and try to establish that the brain basis of mysticism is very much a valid scientific question that can be investigated. And in order to do so, I'm going to talk about the brain, the mind, and the dichotomy between the brain and the mind, and how these things can actually be scientifically measured using magnetic resonance imaging. And once that is done, I'm going to pick a few illustrative studies and examples to show how these techniques have been used to studying and better understanding mysticism. I'm going to talk about certain studies regarding meditation, mantra and chanting, breathing techniques, and finally religiosity. So these are going to be two modules. So let me start off with the first module. Okay, so the brain is about 3 pounds in weight. It's just 2%, approximately 2% of the body weight. But what is astonishing is that it consumes 25% of the body's oxygen supply, 70% of the body's glucose. That's why you see that anybody has low or high glucose, they faint, because brain is very sensitive to glucose and consumes 25% of the body's nutrients. So it's really the supercomputer that is driving our body. Even more astonishing is the number of neurons, which is like a transistor, which is a basic processing unit in the brain. There are 100 billion neurons, and there are 1 quadrillion connections. So you have million, billion, trillion, and quadrillion. So you can imagine how big is quadrillion. And 1 quadrillion connections between 100 billion neurons. So, and this much is packed into this small organ inside the skull. So it's quite amazing how evolution got to this point of producing this amazing organ. Okay, that's the brain. And when I say all this, what is the image of the brain that comes to your mind? That is, it is a physical organ. It's something very physical, right? But when I use the word mind, what is the image that comes to your mind? Mind means feelings, thoughts, emotions, and these intrinsically appear to us as non-physical entities, right? So the question is, and this has been a question for philosophers for very long, what is the relationship between the brain and the mind? What is the mind-brain dichotomy? Are these two things the same thing? Are they interdependent on each other? Before I answer that question, I'm going to play a video of a news story on CNN. And this news story is about a person who has treatment-resistant depression, which means the person's depression doesn't go away for any treatment, and they are suicidal, which means if you don't do anything, they're ultimately going to commit suicide. So at Emory University, where I did my postdoctoral fellowship, they did a surgery wherein they implanted electrodes into the person's brain and tried to switch on different electrodes. These different electrodes, as you can see in the video, at different points in the brain. And when they switch on one particular electrode, and I'll stop the video at that point, the person says that I smiled after a very long time in my life. Okay? So let's see that video and then let's come back and resume our thoughts about the relationship between the mind and the brain.
Publicist for Robin Williams said the actor had been treated for severe depression. While we don't know all the details, we do know this: he's not alone. For many people, medication or cognitive behavioral therapy can be effective treatments, but for a sizable group, there is nothing that seems to work. So it's very exciting to learn about a potentially new approach. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. It's a device like this. It's implanted like a pacemaker just underneath your collarbone, and these two wires are inserted directly into the brain. And then on the outside, a doctor can literally flip a switch, turning it on. It's pretty radical stuff, but in some cases, the results can be astonishing. For as long as Edie Guyton can remember, she could not get the sad thoughts out of her head.
I mean, my mother used to say to me, "Smile, Edie, why don't you smile?" And I would, give her something like that maybe, or just think, what is there to smile about?
At 19, the first of 3 suicide attempts.
For reasons that are inexplicable to me, even now. Got up and started playing with a razor, and
You cut your wrists.
Mm-hmm.
You cut both your wrists?
yeah.
So basically she had treatment-resistant depression and she tried to commit suicide.
Over the next 40 years.
Got up and started playing with a razor, and
You cut your wrists.
Mm-hmm.
You cut both your wrists?
yeah.
Over the next 40 years, she tried counseling, psychiatric drugs, and electroconvulsive shock therapy. But nothing worked.
The despair, I think, is what is the most powerful push towards suicide, because there feels like there is no hope.
But if you could look inside Edie Guyton's head today, this is what you'd see. 2 electrodes.
So this is an MRI of her brain, and they have actually operated and inserted 2 electrodes, and each electrode has 4 contact points, okay? And these contact points can be switched on or off from outside, okay? And they are going to do this inside the operation theater and see how our emotions changes.
The thickness of angel hair pasta, powered by a battery pack under her collarbone.
I don't think about it, but I have electrodes in my brain.
It's an experimental use of deep brain stimulation. So what are we looking at here? Pioneered by neurologist Dr. Helen Mayberg.
The X is where we're stimulating.
The target is called Area 25, a junction box for the brain circuits that control our moods. Here at Emory, where I'm on staff, my colleagues have been using deep brain stimulation for more than 15 years to treat movement disorders such as Parkinson's disease. In that case, they're targeting the brain's motor system. But Dr. Mayberg wanted to use DBS to target Area 25 for patients with severe depression. It was a procedure just like this done on Edie Guyton. In surgery, patients are lightly sedated as a neurosurgeon drills 2 holes. With an instrument to guide him, he then inserts the electrodes.
Is the contact on?
Contact's on.
As a benchmark, the doctors asked Edie to rate her feelings on a scale of 1 to 10, starting with dread.
What? That sense of dread is getting worse. Your sense of dread is getting worse. Rate it. Okay.
2 minutes later, they turned on one of the 4 contacts.
How does it feel right now? Is it still hot?
So there are 4 contacts. They tried 2 of them, and when either of them were on, she said that her mood did not change at all. And then we will see what happens when the 3rd contact is switched on from outside.
What's the dread right now?
A drop from 8 to 3, but doctors would soon get an even better result.
We're going to make some changes.
Up until this time, Edie could not connect emotionally, not even with her baby grandniece, Susan.
And somebody handed her to me, and I held her, but I was going through the motions, and I felt really nothing.
Nothing.
Nothing. Nothing.
That changed in the operating room
On, still on.
when they tried contact number 2.
Just let me know if anything changes. Just give a shout. yours, would you please?
So this is the main point I want to make. That just by switching on one electrode implanted deep inside the brain structure, they were able to make a person smile who has not smiled in a very long time. Okay, and I'll come to the implications of this.
Right there in the little brain surgery, I felt feelings that I thought were gone.
When you say you almost smiled, did something strike you as funny, or is it just sort of spontaneous?
It was, well, actually, I was thinking of playing with Susan. I started thinking about Susan, little Susan, and I thought I was holding her with her face to me.
What was it like just to think that a machine and electricity could transform your emotions like that?
It felt fantastic. I didn't care what was doing it. It just felt great.
Now, Edie's transformation, as you saw there, is pretty dramatic. And
So as he said, the very thought of just having something in your brain and an electrical stimulation transform your thoughts is something that people would not have thought of maybe 10-15 years ago. So why is this important? This is important for mysticism because mysticism is commonly associated with altered states of the mind. Technically you can call it altered states of consciousness. And pre-1980 we had this common notion that mind is a non-physical entity, brain is a physical entity. Therefore, there cannot be a brain basis for the mind. So this is the mind-body problem. That question is still there. So this really doesn't answer the question whether the mind is physical or not. That's a philosophical question, which I'm not going to touch. However, what is of consequence in scientific investigations, and this has been shown with a lot of evidence post-1980, that the mind has a physical basis and it can be physically manipulated, as shown in the video. So that tells us that it is possible to investigate the basis of these abstract notions like mysticism using scientific techniques that are in vogue today. I just talked about this, so let's skip it. So how do we physically measure brain function? So I said that we can actually, this has a physical basis, can be physically manipulated. Then how do we physically measure brain function? This has a long history of more than 100 years, and there have been a lot of different techniques. What I show here is a sample of all these techniques. So what is shown on the y-axis is the spatial resolution, which is given any particular technique, what is the distance or the space that it can cover. So if I go higher here, it is in matter of centimeters. Okay, if I go lower here, then it's like whether you have a 2 megapixel camera or a 20 megapixel camera. So your spatial resolution is higher when you have a 20 megapixel camera. You can see the details. So you would want to see more details. And x-axis is the temporal resolution. You can see this is milliseconds and this is minutes. So you would want to capture as much detail as possible, as quickly as possible. So you would want to have high spatial temporal resolution in any scientific method that you use to measure brain function. Such techniques which have high spatial temporal resolution, which is basically low on this axis and low on this axis, these two techniques are invasive, which means that, like local field potentials, we'll have to open the skull and stick an electrode, which scientists have been doing for a long time in animals and monkeys. It's really hard to do it in humans unless the person is getting brain surgery. So people have been trying to find, are there any non-invasive techniques wherein we don't have to stick an electrode? There have been EEG is one technique that has been in vogue for a long time. You can see this has very good temporal resolution, which means it can look at sample very fast in time, but its spatial resolution is coarse. You won't know from where exactly the signal is coming from. Okay. There are other techniques like PET, SPECT, and NIRS. The good thing about fMRI is, as you can see here, it has lowered it has a better temporal resolution than some of the other techniques, and also it has a better spatial resolution from some of the other techniques. So it has a good trade-off between spatial and temporal resolutions, and that's why when fMRI was discovered in the early 90s, and after that there was an explosion in research, and that's why the graph that I showed you, there's a lot of research that has happened in this field since 2000. So just wanted to motivate you regarding why I'm talking about functional magnetic resonance imaging, because it has its unique place in all this map of modalities. MRI scanner, everybody would here, I presume, would have seen one. You would have gotten an MRI, or someone you know would have gotten an MRI. And the physics behind how you get MRI images is very complicated, so I'm really not going to get into that. But basically, human body in a very, very strong magnetic field, and from that you can take pictures and videos of the brain or any other part of the body for that matter. So let's look at the history of magnetic resonance. There has been 2 different Nobel Prizes in magnetic resonance, one in physics and another in medicine. So this has had a large impact on the society. There are 2 different types of MRI images. One is the routine MRI, that clinically if you have any issue, you will get it in a hospital. It's called a structural MRI. Okay, it's a structural MRI because it gives only structural information. So as you can see here, so this is the human brain. So the image that you see here is what you would see if you had cut the human brain in this axial slice. Okay, and similarly you can cut it in any other direction and see how the structure is. For example, if you had a tumor in the brain, you could see using the structural image. It's called a structural image because it doesn't tell you anything about the function. It's like a photograph. Okay, it doesn't tell you, it doesn't have any time information. So it doesn't tell you what is happening to these structures over time, and that's when functional MRI comes into picture. Okay, so let me show an image of how the entire structure of the brain looks like. So these are different slices of the brain. So the entire 3D brain volume is imaged in one time instant. So it's like a photograph. Okay. Functional MRI, on the other hand, is a video wherein all these images are taken over time, so that you can see how function is evolving over time. Okay. Let me show you a simple video to demonstrate how functional MRI can be used to understand which regions of the brain are involved in different tasks. So this video shows, for example, if you're tapping your finger, the region of the brain involved in this finger tapping actually consumes more oxygen and glucose, because that is what is the energy that drives everything in the body. So that can be detected using functional MRI. So let's look at this video. It doesn't have any video, but it illustrates what I was saying. So the person is tapping the finger, and in order to do so, the signal has to come from certain part of the brain, and for that to happen, that part of the brain requires more oxygen and glucose. And that can be, so you can see all the regions in the red are taking more oxygen and glucose when the person is tapping the finger. So by inference, you can say that those regions control movement. So this is what I call as forward inference. Okay, wherein you are saying, okay, if I did this, which region of the brain was activated? Then if I'm tapping finger, there's a region of the brain called primary motor cortex which is activated. So that must be the region involved in executing movements. So same thing can be done for more abstract and difficult concepts too. For example, if solving a mathematical problem, which regions of the brain are activated? Okay, this is called forward inference. And there is an enormous amount of literature on this. What is more interesting is reverse inference. If I have the MRI data, can I just look at the data and tell what the person was doing? So this is mind reading. If I take any one of you, put you inside the scanner, tell you can think whatever you want to, I will just look at the data and tell you what you were thinking. Okay, so this is reverse inference, or in general parlance, it's called mind reading. And this, people have tried this and they have been fairly successful of it. So the results I am showing here was a study done at MIT and published in 2010, wherein the students were given the letter M they were asked to see this letter M. Okay, and you can see this, the same image is shown as an activity pattern in the primary visual cortex. So just by looking at the data, you can actually say that these people are looking at the letter M. Another famous example published in the journal Science in 2004 is predicting movie scenes based on brain data. So these are different scenes in the movie, The Good, Bad and the Ugly. It was a famous movie in the 1970s, I guess. So if you have seen that, so different people were asked to just watch this movie, and you can see that the different scenes are labeled here with different numbers, and you can see what the data look like at those points. So you can actually build a machine learning algorithm like a neural network, and just looking at the data, the algorithm can tell you what particular still of the movie that person was seeing. So this is classic mind reading. And these two examples I have shown wherein you're doing the mind reading for sensory stimulus, and it can be taken one step further, and this is called brain-computer interfaces, wherein people are paraplegic, they cannot move, but if they think that they want to move, it can actually move a robotic arm. And even going further, people have shown that, for example, lie detection. Somebody is lying, especially hardened criminals. Okay, you won't get a galvanic skin response. So you can actually use fMRI to detect that they are lying. There's one company, and I show the website here. Company in California, which it's called No Lie MRI, which actually offers this service to clients, and this evidence is admissible in court. So this is where the field stands right now regarding reverse inference and mind reading, which frankly speaking was not perceivable 10 to 15 years ago. So what is the take home message? So I talked so much about fMRI, MRI, brain, mind, and I did this in order to make this important point related to mysticism. Now it is possible to detect, measure and objectively characterize one's perceptions, feelings and thoughts with physical measurements. There's absolutely no doubt about it. The mind, brain or the physical, non-physical question is still there, okay? But in this context it's not functionally relevant. I am not saying that this solves that problem, but just that it is not functionally relevant in this context. And in the next 2 decades it will be possible to probe even subconscious mind and the deepest mind using physical measurements with astonishing accuracy. Therefore, the brain basis of mysticism is a very abstract concept, is very much a valid scientific question which can be investigated. I say this because most people, especially the scientific community, would not agree with this 15 years ago. They would say that it's just not possible. It's not something that can be. For example, today if you went ahead and said that there's something called as the soul, Jivatma, which is a non-physical entity, and it can be investigated using science, most people would not think that that is a valid pursuit. And 15 years ago, the same would have been the case for this. But today that's not the case. So this is a valid scientific pursuit. There's a large number of groups all over the world working on it, and continuously stuff is being published. Okay, so with that take home message, let's move forward to the second module, which is applications. So now that this fact has been established that this is a valid scientific pursuit, let's look at what people have done. And mysticism can include both spirituality and religiosity. Religiosity is kind of tied to specific religious beliefs and religions, while spirituality may not be. So I'm going to cover both of these topics. I'm going to sample, I won't say cover, because I cannot talk about everything that has been done. Various types of meditation, spiritual practices and religious practices in Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity and different Chinese traditions like Qigong have been investigating using scientific methods, and they have been published. Now obviously, since I cannot talk about all of them, I would have to sample some of that literature and present it here. And here I give you the criteria that I have used for sampling that. I've seen whether a lot of stuff is published, so you have to see which of them are worthy. I have made sure that the ones that I'm talking about, they have conducted the experiment and it's scientifically rigorous. And they are published in reputed journals which have a long-standing reputation of rigorous peer review. They cover the spectrum of various links between brain and mysticism. And some of the questions obviously are quite narrow, but I've tried to choose the ones that are of general interest to the society and also hold important clues for the future. So, I mean, this is still a subjective sampling, but I hope you understand that I cannot talk about everything. So, this is how I have organized this module. There are going to be 5 different aspects that I'm going to be talking about. First is meditation. I'll talk about different scientific reports regarding structural and functional changes brought about by meditation. Then I'm talk about a little bit about mantra and chanting. Then breathing. Some people consider that to be part of meditation, but in the scientific literature that is not so. So that's why I put it as different. Then so all of these kind of fall in the realm of spirituality. Then I'm going to talk about religiosity, about its evolutionary and biological basis and utility. And finally, if I have time, I'll talk about the brain and the body, because we cannot see the brain in isolation. Okay, let's look at the first one, which is basically papers looking at structural changes brought about in the brain due to meditation. So when I say structural changes, this is basically changes in cortical thickness. So when you have the brain, you have what is known as the cortex. In this one you can see here, this is all the cortex, and there is something known as the grey matter. So somebody is very intelligent, some people say that, wow, tumba chanagide on grey matter. Okay, that's because grey matter contains all these 100 billion neurons that I was talking about, and the white matter contains all the connections between them. So if you have a thick grey matter, if you have a thick cortex, it means that generally your cognitive abilities are higher. Okay, and that's why cortical thickness is important. What happens is, with aging, cortical thickness peaks around age around 20 to 25 and starts declining. Okay, and that's just aging. There's something known as healthy aging, wherein it happens to everybody. There's nothing abnormal about it. So with aging, certain faculties get slower, processing speed and these things. So that happens. That's healthy. It's not pathological. And as you can see here, all the red dots are healthy subjects who are non-meditators, and their cortical thickness with age decreased. Okay, that's perfectly normal. And what Sarah Lazar, I think Dr. Kannan mentioned about this before. So she's one of my collaborators at Harvard, and she published this in 2005 and made a lot of news because she selected a group of meditators who have been very experienced meditators who practice mindfulness-based meditation, which is another word for vipassana. So, and they did the same analysis with these people, with expert meditators, and you can see the results in these blue dots, and you can see the line fit here. Their cortical thickness did not decrease with age, it remained the same. Okay, and then so she concluded that regular meditation practice can actually reverse cognitive aging. And this was one of the earliest studies, and so it made a lot of news. And another study which also looks at structure is basically published in 2012 in the Proceedings of the National Academy, which is a very reputed journal. This was done in both China and US. What they did was, since the previous study they looked at long-term meditators. They wanted to see, in this study they wanted to see whether short-term meditation has any effect on the brain structure. So subjects underwent this integrative mind-body training, which is a mixture of Zen and Buddhist techniques of mindfulness-based meditation. 30 minutes of meditation each day for 1 month, resulting in 11 hours of meditation. That is not a lot. 30 minutes each day for 1 month. It's considered short. What they found, and they scanned them before and after this meditation course, what they found interestingly is this white matter fibers here, they had increased neuronal fiber density. So all the connections between these neurons had gotten better. It's as if the 2-lane road became a 4-lane road. Okay, so that there can be more efficient transfer of information. And this was really astonishing because people always thought that meditation is something that you have to do over a long period of time in order to see actual statistical effects. But this was a really short course and still it had some statistical effects. So that's why it made a lot of news. Okay, now let's get to the functional changes. So both these things that I talked about is structural changes. So whether the road is 4-lane or 2-lane, it's a change in structure. When I say functional, I'm talking about the traffic on the road. Okay, how many cars are there? Are they going fast? Are they going slow? I hope you can understand the difference between function and structure. So functional changes, the literature has 2 types of papers. One are case studies wherein you have very few subjects, and other has population studies where you have large number of subjects. You can run statistical analysis to make sure that your result is not because of chance. Usually in science, case studies are not acceptable because it's just 1% or 2%, whatever you found could be just because of chance, right? So if you flip a coin, you say head or tail, there's 50% chance that you will get a head or tail. So, but it is accepted in this field because you cannot find 100 mistakes, for example. So you probably find very few people with such special abilities. So case studies are accepted, not as conclusive evidence, but for evidence which is worth pursuing. So they form different, they give evidence which can form hypotheses for future research. So first let's look at the case studies. This is another influential paper published in the European Journal of Pain in 2005. So what they did was, the study was actually conducted in Japan. The study is done on a single subject, and he's an unnamed 65-year-old male Indian yoga master. What the yoga master claimed is that he cannot feel pain during meditation. And how did they go about testing whether what he's saying is true or false? What they did was they scanned him by giving painful stimulus and when he was not meditating. And you can see all these regions, they are activated. This is known as the pain matrix. So any person get painful stimulus, activate certain regions of the brain. And this is expected. Then they said, okay, why don't you do meditation? We are going to give exactly the same painful stimulus and we are going to scan you again and see whether the pain matrix is activated. Okay, that is independent validation for what he is claiming. As you can see here, you can see they are showing 3 activated regions here and the same here. There is no activation in these regions of his brain when they gave exactly the same painful stimulus, but the person was meditating. So this actually proves, and you can also see the time courses here. I'm not going to go into that, in different regions of the brain. So this proves that what he's claiming is true. He actually does not feel pain. Okay, and provides a wonderful template. The study provides a wonderful template for scientifically validating claims made by different people. So unfortunately what's happened in society is there's some people who make claims and some people who debunk those claims without testing them. And I feel that if the media does that, they are as guilty as the person who is claiming it, because you have to actually test it. And so this provides a wonderful template for that. Another such case study, and this was done in Boston University. So I don't know whether you can read this. So it says, so this is neurophenomenology of an altered state of consciousness, an fMRI case study. A research participant came to our lab with self-proclaimed ecstatic Kundalini meditative experiences. So somebody just came into their lab and said that I have all these altered states of consciousness. So he claimed something with respect to Kundalini. We have no way of verifying whether that was true or not, but he had some kind of experiences and he wanted his brain scanned, and they said, okay, let's do it. And what they found was activation in the anterior prefrontal cortex. And they have given many reasons for why that is so. But the point I want to make here, so this is the anterior prefrontal cortex. This is the part of the brain that is exclusive to humans. Even chimpanzees don't have, which is our nearest evolutionary relative, don't have an anterior prefrontal cortex. So I think that is telling. It's a case study. I really cannot make any more stronger claims, but it is telling that this person had activation in this region which is exclusively present only in humans. So this is another very interesting study published by a group in NIMHANS, closer home, Dr. Gangadhar, who is now the director of NIMHANS. So this was published in the International Journal of Yoga, investigating paranormal phenomena, functional brain imaging of telepathy. Okay, telepathy, you might have heard, there are people known as mentalists who claim that they can read other people's minds, and some people believe it and some people don't. So this group of researchers decided to test this proposition. So what they did is really interesting. So the experiment was set up as follows. In one experiment, the mentalist, the person who claims that he can know what the other person is thinking, was inside the scanner being scanned. And there was another researcher sitting outside who would draw one image, okay? And this is the image that he drew. One square here, circle here, and in lines like this inside. Okay, there's no way for the mentalist to know what this person has drawn. And the mentalist was asked to draw, to establish a telepathic link and guess what the other person has drawn who's sitting outside the scanner. Okay? And while this was being done, data from his brain was being acquired. And you can see here, it came pretty close. Okay? So what the mentalist did not get is the circle, but he got the square, and the patterns in the square are really similar. Yeah, people in the back, if you can stand, probably you can see. And they did not stop at that, because scientific experiments need control conditions. What that means is that you need to exclude trivial explanations for your data. So in order to do that, they repeated this experiment with another person who is not a mentalist, but who tried to guess what this person who is sitting outside is drawing. Okay? So in that second experiment, the person sitting outside drew something